How's it going, everyone? This is DoctorJefe, and welcome to another Crusader Kings 3 tutorial video. Today I'm going to be talking about dread, a measure of how feared a ruler is. Specifically, we're going to be talking about how to gain dread. In another video, we'll talk about traits and perks that can give you innate or natural dread, modify the amount of dread that you gain, and also modify the dread decay rate. We'll also talk about the effects of dread in another video. Now, disclaimer that this video was set up using debug mode, so remember not to load any Iron Man saves if your game is in debug mode. Now, dread is a new mechanic to Crusader Kings 3. To find your ruler's dread level, go to their character page and look for the Gauntleted Fist. You can see that our current character has 0 out of 100 dread. Now, the three main actions you're going to take in order to gain dread are imprisoning your subjects, and then once people are in prison, torturing or executing them. Now, if you were to imprison a king or emperor, aka your spouse level subject, you would gain 20 dread. So imprisoning our empress spouse gains us 20 dread. If we were to imprison the king of Bohemia, we would gain 20 dread. If we were to imprison the king of Bohemia's spouse, we would also gain 20 dread. Going down from the king to the duke level, if we were to imprison a duke, we would gain 10 dread. The wife of a duke, also 10 dread. This is the same for count level vassals. 10 dread for this bishop, prince bishopric. Same thing for your typical feudal counts. 10 dread. And if we are able to find a count who has a wife who's alive, we would see that we would also gain 10 dread for the spouse of a count. Now, if we go lower than counts, say to this holder of this city, we will find that we gain no dread. We still do gain tyranny, though. And that goes the same for unlanded characters. Perhaps some random person in your court. Unfortunately, throwing them in prison will gain you no dread. Now, a quick note about imprisoning people. One of the most important stats is your intrigue. So characters who have an intrigue learning background will have a higher success chance. And there's also a perk in the intrigue lifestyle called Prison Feudal Complex down in the Torturer skill tree. This gives you plus 50% chance to imprison someone. This is a great way to increase the amount of people that you can imprison. Also, you see that their opinion of you affects how likely you are to imprison them. So while you may want to imprison people who don't like you a lot, you're actually more likely to be able to imprison those who have a high opinion of you, which makes a lot of sense in a very sad and tyrannical Crusader Kings 3 kind of logic. Now, let me load up a save where we have a lot of people in prison. And we can look at how torturing these people can not only gain you secrets, and if you go down the Torturer skill tree path, you can also gain a lot of other different things through the Torturer perks, but it can also gain you dread. So say you were to torture your spouse, you can gain 10 dread. Now, spouses are very strange, in that spouses of rulers can gain you somewhere between 0 to 10 dread. Say we look at this Duke of Angria's spouse. If we were to torture her, we gain 0 dread. But if we look at the Duke of Lausitz's spouse, if we are to torture her, we gain 10 dread. I'm not exactly sure why this range exists, but it does. So, however, on average, I've found that mostly spouses of subjects will give you 0 dread. For example, the spouse of the King of Bohemia, 0 dread. Spouse of the King of Bavaria, 0 dread. Spouse of the Count of Aargau, 0 dread. But sometimes you may find someone who can give you 10 dread, and also 5 dread. Typically, your direct vassals will give you 20 dread if they are of a king level. So torturing the King of Bohemia gives you 20 dread. Now, I'm not exactly sure why torturing the King of Bavaria only gives you 15 dread, but there does seem to be a range here. You'll see this a lot in this torture mechanic, that there's these ranges, and I hope that if someone who is wiser than me shows up and understands why this range exists, please do let me know. I would love to understand it. Now, dukes and counts that are your direct vassals, as you can see, you are their liege. If you were to torture them, they will give you 15 dread. Again, the spouse, this one gives you 10 dread. Why? I don't know. Now the counts, they will also give you 15 dread. So this is a county level title. He will give you 15 dread. This man, torture him, he will give you 15 dread. If you go to baron or lower status, so say this poor baron that we keep picking on, he gives you no dread for torturing him. And same thing for courtiers. I haven't thrown any of these courtiers in prison, but I suppose we could do that. Let's see. Yes, justice for this poor man. If he's tortured, no dread. So similar to the Imprison level. Another thing is that if you have an indirect vassal, so say that we put Duke of Bavaria no longer under us, but under the King of Bavaria, instead of giving 15 dread for torturing him, you only gain 10 dread. Counts also are worth less if they are not direct vassals. If we were to torture this count who's under the King of Bavaria, he only gives 5 dread. So that's an important thing to note of who you're deciding to imprison, torture. Executions are separate. So torturing takes into account this liege in between, these levels of feudalism. But executing does not, and neither does imprisoning. So if we were to imprison, say, some person, if I can find someone who I haven't imprisoned already, he's underneath someone. However, if we imprison him, we still gain the 10 dread. So torture seems to take into account this level between if they're your direct vassal or an indirect vassal, whereas imprisoning and executing, as we will see, does not. One thing to note is that close kin. If you torture your close kin, say your siblings, you will gain 10 dread. So torturing your sisters, your mother, gains you 10 dread. Non-close siblings, so just members of your dynasty, like this poor man, if you were to torture them, you would gain 5 dread. So even though he's an unlanded person, because he's of our dynasty, we gain 5 dread for torturing him. Looking at hostile leaders, this will give you a different amount of dread. So a hostile emperor, like the emperor of the Seljuk clan, if you were to torture them, you gain 20 dread. Now, spouses, again, are strange, even for hostile or foreign leaders. If we were to torture the spouse of the Seljuks, we gain 0 dread. However, if we come over to the Byzantine, we can torture the emperor for 20 dread, and the spouse for 5 dread. Why? Again, I still don't understand. If we were to torture a foreign king, well, one thing to note is you can't torture anyone who is not an adult, so under the age of 16. But if we were to torture a foreign king, that would gain us 15 dread. A foreign duke, if I can grab some dukes from out of here, they give you 10 dread, and a foreign count will give you 5 dread. I knew I threw one of these counts in jail. Barons and unlanded foreigners will give you 0 dread for torturing them. An interesting exception is the Pope, who, even though he's a kingdom rank, if you torture him, you gain 20 dread. Finally, we're looking at executions. If you execute your own kings, they will give you 30 dread, as well as the spouses of kings, 30 dread. This is the same even for the King of Bavaria, who, even though we could torture him for less dread, executing him will get us the same 30 dread. This also applies to your spouse if you're an emperor, 30 dread. Looking at dukes and counts as well as their spouses, not torture, executing will give you 20 dread. You can confirm this with the count level. Executing a count or their spouse will gain you 20 dread. Going down to the barons and unlanded folk, executing them will gain you 10 dread. Same for... where did that man I threw in prison go? Oh, this guy. Yes. Any unlanded or baron level vassals or courtiers will gain you 10 dread. Now, if you execute your close kin, that will gain you 30 dread. Gives you a big negative trait of being a kinslayer, but it's a great way to gain a lot of dread. Executing dynasty members will give you 10 dread. You can see that for the adult, as well as for the children. Executing hostile or foreign leaders will also gain you dread. A foreign king will gain you 30 dread. Again, spouses are weird. So a foreign spouse in France, executing her will only gain you 10 dread. Whereas if you look at the emperors, executing the emperor will gain you 30 dread of the Seljuks. Executing the emperor's wife, also 30 dread. Still, I don't understand why. Dukes and counts will gain you 20 dread, similar to as what you would gain if you executed your own dukes and counts. And baron and unlanded folks will gain you 10 dread. So, this discusses the ways that you can gain dread. We'll talk about the benefits of gaining dread, as well as some of the downsides. You know, you do induce tyranny a lot of times, but there are some ways to execute people without inducing tyranny. For example, if they're from a different country, you don't gain tyranny for executing them. You also wouldn't gain tyranny for torturing them. It does cost piety, but there are perks to overcome this. In the next video, we'll talk about different perks and traits that can affect the amount of dread that you gain, as well as some of the benefits of having a high dread score. I hope you enjoyed this video, and you can use it to become a dreaded, horrible, vicious, vile ruler that you always wanted to be. Until next time, please do remember to take care of yourself.